I sold my main business like 18 months ago. By the time I sold it, the majority of my crew was Amish.
Really?
Yeah.
Amish?
Yeah.
How did you find these guys?
Do they just so I the
Because they don't use electricity, right? So like,
yeah. Well, so we
it's not
can
like you
we
get them
can dude, we
online.
can talk
Can you
about
get them online?
we
Do
we
they
can,
cheat?
So yeah. So dude, I got some Amish buddies that I love, man, and I don't like Mark, if you're listening, man, and you probably shouldn't be listening because you're Amish, but but no. So to answer your question, man, is it just depends on what church they're from and the rules that they have established, and what they're doing. So if it's for business, a lot of them can use email. They can use your cell
Really?
phone. Yeah,
Oh, what a
yeah,
hack.
yeah, yeah.
That's ridiculous. Then you're not
Yeah, yeah.
Amish.
Well,
That's the whole thing. You
yeah.
can't use fucking email.
Well, here's the deal. So yeah, so I'm not an expert at them, but I became very good friends with some of them. Because I mean, I had some of them work for me for 4 or 5 years, and man, there's some things about them that are absolutely amazing. You know what I mean? Like
Hardworking people.
Hardworking is an understatement, man. And the other thing that's wild about them is I had a lot of very young Amish guys come work for me, and we could get into the details of that. Technically, they hadn't like committed to the Amish church, so they weren't technically Amish yet.
Oh, was it the Rumspringer thing?
Yeah, they would be
Yeah.
kind of in that process.
For people who don't know, they have like a time period of an indefinite time period where they're allowed to just
Right.
run around and party and do drugs and
Yeah.
and sleep around, and then they have to come back to the church if they want to.
Right. And when they came out to my place, they didn't do any of that stuff other than work. But
Wink.
but anyways, they would come out, and what I noticed, man, is if you take an 18-year-old Amish guy and you're just doing stuff around like ranch, because we were outfitting and guiding a lot of time, but we also had to manage the livestock, and we had kind of a ranch that we had to take care of. Those guys at 18, they know a ton because they've already been working for 7 years. You know what I mean? They know how to frame a door. They could show up to my place, Joe, and like they're wearing sandals and shorts, and you're thinking like, this guy's never been around livestock, and you be like, hey man, go grab that mule and saddle it. Every single one of them knew how to do it because they grow up catching horses and putting them on a buggy every day. So it's just wild that they learn all these skill sets that really early on. So in some ways, like, I don't, from an education standpoint, none of them had a hard time communicating with me, or we always could get through all that. Maybe they didn't have as good as spelling, or they didn't have as good at like algebra skills or something because they missed out on some of that education, maybe. But I can tell you from a work ethic and like a hands-on skill set, they're amazing, man.
Yeah,
Like,
that's an education too. It's interesting because we only want to think about education in terms of like things you can use in the corporate world or
right.
that you can use in the business world. But the reality of education is you're learning things, and they learn so many things, I'm sure, that the average person who works in an office is never going to understand.
Right.
Take an average guy who works over at Google and say, hey, man, go put a saddle on that mule.
Yeah.
And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about, right?
Yeah.
That's a learned skill. And
Yeah.
it's a learned skill that has a diminished value
Right.
in our world. But in your world, in the world of outfitters, it's a very high value.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and the thing about their education, too, it's like the homeschooling. I'm sure it varies wildly.
Yeah, and that's why I don't mean to make a judgment
Yeah.
on them. I don't.
I'm sure some of them are like really
Yeah,
good at
yeah.
homeschooling their kids, and some
Yeah.
of them, it's just like regular homeschooling.
Right.
I've met some homeschooled kids that are phenomenal. They're like really interesting kids, but the parents did a great job of giving them a very nuanced education, and then
Sure.
also committing them to activities so they interacted with a lot of kids on a regular basis. They just didn't go to school during the day with kids, and it's like
Right.
if you have that kind of time and that kind of commitment, and maybe you're just not very happy with a regular school system. It's
Right.
not. People used to think that it was a bad idea to homeschool your kids, but during COVID, I think a lot of people kind of opened their eyes. First of all, how difficult it is, but also that there's a value to being there while your children are learning things, so you can kind
Sure.
of communicate with them and go through, especially if you have an expertise in something.
Right.
Like if like I used to, my youngest daughters used to do martial arts, and it was kind of like a mixed martial arts class. And I would go with them to mixed martial arts class and sit on the sideline. And then a couple of times some stuff came up. And I said to the instructor, I said, actually, you shouldn't really do it that way.
Yeah.
Because, like, they weren't, as a black belt in jiu-jitsu, I'm like,
Yeah, sure.
you're actually exposed. You're going to get your back taken if you teach people this path.
Right.
Like, this is a very vulnerable path. Like, let me show you the difference. And so I'd go on the mat with them and show them the difference. The next thing I know, I'm doing it with my daughter, and I'm having her do it,
Yeah.
and I'm working with little kids. It's really exciting. It's fun
Yeah.
to be able to teach your kids something. And they love that something that they can learn. And it's like, it gives them pride. So, like, these people that are learning from their families and from their community, it's a completely different way of life, but it's probably a more healthy way of life than the average person experiences just going to a regular, mundane, sort of, very regimented, traditional school system.
Yeah. No, I think that's for sure the case. I mean,
But the electricity thing's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Joe. I'll tell you about a conversation I had with one guy that I consider a pretty good friend. And I'll be honest with you, the Amish, from what my observations, they don't make a real strong effort to have like close relationships with people outside of the community. At least I always felt that way. But one individual I would say is a very good friend of mine, and I asked him, like, well, dude, like, what? It seems like so. It seems like where do you stop the technology? Where do you start? And he actually had a rational explanation. He said, look, man, like, we make these judgments, and I think a big part of it is we're just trying to judge, like, we know the value of having a certain pace of life, and these technology judgments are based on that. We want to be able to still, succeed, feed our families, because they still got to deal with, like, the realities of, they got to buy land to have their farms, all that stuff. But he's like, look, it's all about pace of life for us. So if we look at a technology and it's going to change that dynamic, then, certain churches may choose not to do that. So I'm with you, man. Like, there's odd things that they do, but I kind of get that explanation too.
I kind of get it, but it's just weird that they have that electricity loophole.
Yeah.
Email loophole. What does it say? The word processor. A new word processor with more memory and more speed made specifically for the plain people, by the plain people. Is that what they used to call themselves?
I don't know. This is what it comes up in a few advertisements for this. It's called the Classic Seals series.
But is the advertising is for Amish? Because it's calling the plain people.
Yeah, it's